All right, quick market update. Everyone seems to be panicking, but again, like I'm going to reiterate, until we break through, maybe another $1,000 lower on Bitcoin, and even then, there's still some support regions. There's really, in my opinion, no reason to be majorly bearish on crypto at the moment. You could make an argument when we start pulling up the DXY chart, if things start getting out of hand with DXY, certainly. We've de-risked a little bit, but overall, you could actually make a strong case for this being a reasonable region to bid. We have our 100-day moving average here. I'm not a big moving average person, but like, look, if price is hitting a 100-day moving average, I'm happy to highlight that for people. It's historically been a pretty decent region to bid, especially in a bull market. We also have, I'll get rid of our moving average there just so this is a little bit clear. We do have our logarithmic trend line, right? So we're on a log view, and we just take our last two major swing lows down here at 38K, and then the most recent one down here at 57K. We're hitting that trend line. Trend lines are another reasonable place to bid. Now, if we move off of logarithmic and we move on to our linear view, we do see that trend line does extend downwards into this kind of, the lower end of our midpoint region, which could be as low as 64, 65K before we catch some support there. If we were to break through the bottom of this and we were to start, printing candles below 64K, I'd be much more willing to be entertain a macro bearish outlook for Bitcoin on the high time frames. Say this is, then we're losing some market structure. We're losing some key support zones over here that had previously held. We're, potentially coming down and, threatening to make a lower low for the first time in, a very, very long time on the high time frames. So not ideal if that happens. But until that does, I still stand by. This is a reasonable area to bid. This is a reasonable area to continue to remain long. Everyone's going to be upset with me and, make me eat my words if this happens. But if this happens and the, market cycle's over, right, then we can start flipping short and making money on the other side of this. But for right now, this is just ugly chop. We're also just entering a support region right here, right? We've seen multiple pullbacks over the last, call it 22 days, last 3 weeks. That have found 1, 2, 3 wicks, daily wicks down into this region. We're already starting to wick back up a little bit here on Bitcoin. We'll see how the rest of the day pans out. But I genuinely would not be surprised if the daily closed somewhere up here, somewhere in this region. And we got a really strong bounce here. I can't predict the future, but I still just don't see anything on the Bitcoin chart that is making me scream, bear thesis. I also don't see anything fundamentally going on aside from DXY spiking, right? Aside from DXY spiking, and on a longer term time frame, yeah, the S&P 500 and stocks in general and the economy is not in great shape. But I don't think that's any reason that Bitcoin can't actually break out and go higher from here. So speaking of DXY, this was like kind of our nightmare scenario, right? The scenario that we did not want to see happen was, we were falling out of this trend. We broke this trend after tapping it, 3 times here recently. We fell out and we revalidated. This, may have something to do with, like a digital yuan or something. I'm not a big FX person, but DXY starting to scream back upwards. That's bearish for risk assets in general. Now, are we at levels that are disturbingly high compared to where we've been over the last 2 years and the last year and a half? No, we've still seen markets be able to rally even in these kind of higher levels. We're also at a big resistance level for DXY, right? So we could support and resistance there, support and resistance there. We could very well see DXY reverse here. Not going to call it one way or another. We could see it travel all the way back up and try to run into resistance to this trend line. We could just see a massive move out of it, which would flush crypto and altcoins and risk assets. But for right now, this is Not ideal. And like I said, I've done some de-risking in general, cutting through some things that aren't, core theses, but otherwise still holding strong, predominantly in Trump token and Dogecoin. Those are my two big theses for this market cycle. Dogecoin ETF is on the way, according to Arthur Hayes and Raoul Pal. And it's just, pretty obvious to me that a Dogecoin ETF is going to get filed for. When we take into account some other things that we've talked about in the past, and then obviously Trump token. I don't really care what the market does. I don't care what the stock market does. I don't care what DXY does. Don't care what Bitcoin does. Don't care what Ethereum does. I still expect Trump token to outperform everything going into the election. So I think it's market agnostic, and that's why I think it's such a great play. There's really not a lot else to be paying attention to, in my opinion, at the moment. We really just need to see Bitcoin find stable ground. We need to see DXY start to find some resistance. Ideally, we'd like to see the S&P 500 break through this ascending wedge, which is a bit of a bearish pattern here, right? We don't want to see this fall. Like, for me, the line in the sand on stocks to start factoring in poor stock performance into potentially Bitcoin's price action is being below this previous high. We dipped below it, but we closed all of our daily, monthly, and weekly candles above this previous high in the S&P 500, and since then we've been fine. We do have some bearish divergence playing, potentially trying to play out here, and potential breakdown in the S&P 500. If that happens, yeah, Bitcoin's going to be struggling, right? So we need to be aware of that scenario as well. Briefly, let's touch on BNB. BNB in a very critical zone. There's not a lot of more bearish patterns than an ascending triangle that deviates and then breaks support. So we really, really, like, for the health of the overall market, seeing a large cap token here like BNB, we really don't want to see this happen. I'll be honest, and I do think there could be further downside in crypto. Certainly, like I said, Bitcoin's on some pretty decent support here. BNB, reasonable place to bid. Yes, this is deviation, but this is a nice support level, a nice level we've seen a lot of volume at. But we start breaking down here. That's where, again, it's a signal for me that, hey, maybe we're actually going to see further downside here. Otherwise, it's just been a very choppy summer so far here in June. I do think there's potential for a breakout, and I do think that the underlying high time frame trends on Bitcoin in particular are still bullish. I think this consolidation is still bullish, but we are running out of time. We need to see this start to move, in my opinion, and I really don't want to see a move down to the bottom of the range again, because then once you've touched this range enough times, people start to get pretty antsy and market can be a little bit bearish. But otherwise, I think for right now, this exact moment in time, things are a little bit dicey, but we're just certainly not out of the woods. But I'm certainly not a macro bear here. I'm not a high time frame bear here. I think you want to give it a chance, give Bitcoin a chance at these levels. We are ultimately, Bitcoin is, everyone's max bearish, and Bitcoin's 9% off of its all-time highs. That is not reason, in my opinion. Like a 9-10% pullback for Bitcoin is extraordinarily common. It's almost like, reminds me of this price action over here, where every time Bitcoin would come down and make a new high or low, everyone would freak out, be super bearish. Like every time we got one of these flushes, that was just like 5%. Yeah, they'd happen aggressively and happen quickly. 8-9%, people would freak out. But ultimately, on the high time frames, this has just continued to resolve upwards, and I do think that Bitcoin is going to continue to resolve upwards. Whether we get a bounce here, a little bit of a deeper correction or revalidation, that is still my base case. Willing to change my mind, but it needs to give some bearish signals first. It needs to flip. We need to make a new low. We need to make a lower high. We need to see back tests fail. We need to see DXY get through some additional resistance. We need to see stocks break down. before I really feel comfortable with a bearish thesis. Otherwise, the thesis is chop or upside, chop or upside. Hopefully this helps. These are just my opinions. I could be wrong. But hopefully this helps. Not financial advice, and hope everyone has a great day and rest of your week. Peace.